So last week we were looking at Joseph's family and the favoritism that was going on in his house. And we were reading that the Bible doesn't really leave us guessing as far as the favoritism was concerned. It plainly tells us, like, this is what it was. And it also talked about how Joseph's brothers, they were probably hurting a lot in their hearts because they had deep hatred towards Joseph in their hearts. And instead of taking that hurt to God, they allowed that to grow into hatred. And we learned about that in scripture through Hebrews about it being a root of bitterness and what happens when we don't check that bitterness. It becomes, like Yesenia said last time, unmanageable. And tonight we're going to see what that hatred starts to produce. But before we even start getting into the text, that we're going to start off of verse 5 and we're going to look all the way to verses 17. I want us to ask ourselves if we've ever found ourselves in a situation where we're probably in the midst of chaos and we find ourselves asking God, what are you doing? Maybe you thought that God was leading you in one direction, but instead things start getting worse and worse and worse instead of getting better, and they get harder and harder. And maybe you thought that a door was opening only to watch it close. Sometimes we find ourselves in seasons that don't make any sense. And that's okay because through this story, we're going to see that we're not alone and that hopefully God shows us and reveals something really cool to us, because a lot of the time we don't have to understand what God is doing, but we can trust that whatever it is that he's doing, that he has a plan. So let's turn to Genesis 37, starting on verse 5 all the way through 17.
Genesis 37, beginning in verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me."
From 10 to 17 says, So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is his dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flocks in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here I am. Then he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan.
Okay, so here where God gives Joseph these dreams and he reveals something to Joseph about his future, but he doesn't explain to Joseph like how this was going to happen. I don't know, like if I were given like this dream, I wouldn't understand what was going on, because a lot of the times when we're presented with situations, we want to know the whole story, right? We want to know how, when, where, how, whatever, before we even agree to do anything. And that's not how God works. God wants us to trust Him one step at a time, because think about it. If God told us every detail of our future, would we really trust Him? If He told you, Yesenia, you know what? I want you to follow me, but in following me, you're going to lose this, you're going to lose that, you're going to go through this, or you're going to go through that, or, your kid is going to die. Are you going to want to follow?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, it requires complete trust. So we would spend our lives, if we knew everything that was going to happen, trying to avoid all of the difficult parts. And sometimes God tells us just enough to trust Him, but not enough that we're going to depend on ourselves. And that is exactly what faith is. We don't have all the answers, but we are trusting in the one who does. And Isaiah reminds us this in Isaiah 55, 8 through 9.
Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts.
So that is amazing, because it says that God's thoughts are higher than ours and His ways are higher than our ways. He can see what we can't. It's like, do you guys like puzzles?
Oh my God, it's so funny you say that. Actually, in this trip that I took to Siesta Key with the families, there was a puzzle. It was 300 pieces, and we started doing it. And actually, like a year ago, I decided that I wanted to start doing puzzles as a hobby, right?
Mhm.
Well, unbeknownst to me, I can't do a puzzle for the life. So everybody's putting all the pieces together, and here I am with 3, 4 little pieces together, and I can't find anything. And you see everybody else putting everything together, y yo soy la
Yeah.
monga not being able to do it.
So it's kind of like a puzzle where we have the one piece and we only see part of it. And God can see the entire puzzle piece put together. He sees the beginning, He sees the middle, He sees the end. We can only see what's in front of us. Now, going into Joseph's dream, should Joseph have just kept this dream to himself? Because the Bible doesn't really tell us. It doesn't tell us if Joseph was right or wrong for sharing his dream with his brothers, but what it does say is that just like the robe, it says that now they hated Joseph even more. The dreams are just exposing what had been growing in their hearts all along. And that's how the heart works. What's inside of your heart will eventually come out. Jesus said that what comes out of your mouth comes from your heart. So in other words, our words and our actions reveal what has been living inside of us. The brothers didn't argue as far as, what the dream was. They had a heart problem. And it makes me think of, like, when someone comes up to me and they share that maybe, like, let's say they got a promotion or something, or they say that they're going to get married or that they're going to start a little business, and they start sharing what God is doing in their life, what is your first response? Are you happy for them, or are you quietly comparing your life to theirs? Again, back to what we were learning before, comparison is dangerous. Why? Because it shifts our focus. Instead of thanking God for what He's doing in our lives or in the life of other people, we get so consumed with what he's doing in other people's lives. And before we know it, we're measuring God's goodness by someone else's blessing. Instead of seeing God's faithfulness in their own lives, all they could see was Joseph, and their hatred for them was consuming them so much. Comparison, it has such an ugly way of shrinking the way that we view God. And I think that it's not so much about Joseph sharing his dream. I think it's about the brothers refusing to receive what God was trying to reveal, because again, the dreams came from who?
God.
They came from God. We may not have dreams like Joseph has, but we still have moments where God is working in ways that we don't understand why things are happening the way that they're happening, or why he's doing things the way that he's doing. So everything is about to change. Now, Jacob is going to send Joseph to check on his brothers, and it sounds like this is a normal request. Like you would tell your kid, oh, go do this, just another day, just another errand. So Joseph, he's being obedient to what his father is asking him to do, not realizing that this is about to change the entire course of his life. And we can apply this to ourselves too, because sometimes life can change for us in a single moment. We can get a horrible phone call, or we can get into a conversation with someone and everything just shifts, or you go to the doctor and they give you horrible news, or you have to make a decision that's going to impact the rest of your life. But here is the comfort that we have as believers, that what surprises us will never surprise God. Joseph doesn't know where this journey is going to lead him, but God does. And even though Joseph can't see it yet, God was already working. Now, Jacob doesn't send one of the older brothers, he sends Joseph, the very son that they already resent. They hate this kid. The very person that they don't want to speak kindly to. And from Jacob's perspective, it's just another responsibility. Oh, go see how your brothers are doing, right? But from God's perspective, this is the beginning of something so much bigger, because Joseph thinks he's just running a simple errand, but God is about to change the course of history. Remember, he's 17 years old. He doesn't realize yet that this simple act of obedience is going to completely change his entire life. He's just obeying his father. He's just being a good son, following directions. And this is something that we can learn from in these two verses, right? Because sometimes we're waiting for God to give us like this big assignment, and we expect like it's going to be so exciting or something really obvious. But God is just asking us to be faithful with whatever is right in front of us. And God's greatest work starts when we are obedient to the Father. He doesn't argue with his dad. He doesn't tell his dad, no, I don't want to go. My brothers hate me. Or, Dad, are you sure? Like, that's a good idea. He just goes. We don't know everything that was going through Joseph's mind, because it doesn't tell us, but we do know that Joseph obeyed. And obedience isn't always something that's comfortable. I know for me, like sometimes it's very hard to obey instructions, and it's not always convenient for me, right? Because it might lead me into places that I would not probably have chosen. It makes us to really ask ourselves, when God asks us to do things, do we obey, or do we wait for things to just become harder? And I think a lot of us can relate to that. We assume that if we're following God, that everything's just going to fall into place and everything's just going to be honky dory. And because we're believers, we're children of God. But that's not what we see throughout the Bible. Abraham obeyed God. Moses obeyed God. David obeyed God. The apostles obeyed God. Jesus obeyed the Father perfectly. But every single one of them went through so much troubles. Just because we are obedient, it doesn't mean that life is going to be easy. It's a willful decision to trust God even when we don't understand where God may be leading us. And, Joseph is about to learn that.
Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan.
Okay, so that's really interesting because Joseph gets to Shechem and his brothers aren't there. Instead, it says that a man found Joseph wandering in the field. And that seems kind of random, but what's he doing? The man approaches Joseph because he sees him there and he's like, Who are you looking for? And Joseph tells him that he's looking for his brothers. And he tells them they've moved to Dothan. Now, Joseph never met that man. When he saw that the brothers weren't where they were supposed to be, he could have just turned around and he could have gone home, right? I would have. Would you?
Yeah, I would have.
Yeah, I mean, I would have showed up and I would have been like, oh, they're
They're
not
not
there.
here.
Exactly, gone back and told my dad I went, but they weren't there. I don't know where they are. But he didn't do that. And maybe if he would have done that, the whole story would have been different. But God made sure that Joseph ended up exactly where he intended him. Was it luck? Was it coincidence?
It was destiny.
And this is one of the first places in this story where we begin to see God's hand at work. Sometimes we expect or we think that God is going to work in like this very dramatic way, but a lot of the times he works in everyday situations. And when we look back, we realize that even though we didn't understand what was happening or why it was happening, that God was leading us the whole time.